I'm so grateful to be here too. Roadrunners up, I'm an alumni. I graduated in fall of 2019. Is the sound behind me loud? Can you hear the coffee grinding?
You can hear a little background noise, but we can hear you.
Gotta love AirPods. Okay. I'm a proud alumni of UTSA, but while I was there, I raised hell. I challenged UTSA on their Title IX policies regarding sexual assault survivors. So theory is critical. It's imperative to grassroots efforts and movements. I often question movements for change if they are not married to some kind of critical race theory, or if they're not married to some kind of theology, because it's so important that the democracy that I constantly say, the democracy that our values function upon is rooted in idealist, thought. So I'll use change rape culture as an example. So I was at UTSA, and I was a policy CX debater on UTSA's debate team. If you have not joined the debate team in UTSA, I highly recommend it. And I debated nationally against Cornell, against major universities. And the world of debate policy is a very critical conversation. It's heavily rooted in theory. You need to know everything from like capitalism to nuclear war. Like, these are very basic conversations in debate. So you have to kind of one up. And I found my home in critical race theory, and I argued Black feminine rage. An author that I'd highly recommend is Roxane Gay, and Bell Hooks. Like, these authors changed my life. So when I joined the debate team at UTSA, a lot of my cases were, I argued something called anti-Blackness. And so within anti-Blackness are theories like critical race theory, Afro-pessimism, and Afrofuturism. Those philosophies, I quite literally call myself an Afrofuturist. I identify as an Afrofuturist because these theories help me conceptualize my Blackness within a Western linear context and outside of a Western linear context. And it really helped me find my footing in organizing. So with that being said, I studied CX, I policy debate. It was like, I was like full-time student, full-time debater, full-time work. Like, I had to work in college and student loans as well. No stranger to those. But when change rape culture started, so long story short, I was a journalist for the Paisano. I was the assistant news editor, and I had my ear to the ground, and rape was just such a casual conversation on campus. At football parties I'd be at, I'd hear, certain football players just casually bragging about the violent. Also, I want to administer a trigger warning before I start this conversation. Rape culture is something that's a bit tough to swallow, and I'm sure that there are survivors in this class. There are survivors everywhere, so I just want to administer a slight trigger warning. But when I was a journalist on the ground, that's when I became so aware of this just being a very casual conversation in the line at Starbucks or like in class. It horrified me. And I decided to change rape culture. And so myself and my co-founder, Taylor Waits, who's now pursuing her doctorate's degree at the University of Pittsburgh, she was at the time Miss UTSA. And we both were just dissatisfied with our experience at the university and our friends who were raped and had rapists in common. So we held a meeting and it was terrifying. There was a lot of serial rape happening on campus, and we decided to write a manifesto. And I did not know that this manifesto would become change rape culture. But we rooted that manifesto upon the principles and the values of the Combahee River Collective. I don't know if you're familiar with the Combahee River Collective. Y'all read it before?
I'm sorry, it was a sign for class.
Yes, okay, so period. I called the Combahee River Collective my Bible, because this was a time where queerness was not celebrated, right? This was a time where Blackness was not celebrated. And this was a time when like Black lesbians who had kids, like literally took their life in their space and reclaimed all of that and said, we're queer, we're here, and we are not satisfied with the functions that, the system functions upon. And so the Combahee River Collective is an amazing statement. And so we pretty much recreated that for UTSA. And we put these flyers all over the bathrooms throughout different areas in the school. I mean, all in the science building, in the business building, they're everywhere. And we didn't expect to get pushback from the university. The university was low key trying to like get ordering the janitors to take them down. And there was a moment I'll never forget. I was in the bathroom and there was a janitor and I caught her with her hand, like taking one of the flyers down. And I had a trench coat on with tape in it. And I was like going to these bathrooms, like putting up these signs and in the stalls. And I looked at her and I just said, please don't take this down. Like, please don't take those signs down. Like the future of rape survivors on this campus rely on that sign. And she looked at me and she walked out. She left the signs up. And that was a moment when I realized that this movement was bigger than me. It was bigger than now. This was something that, this was a fight that generations have been fighting. Rape culture is something that civil society has been founded upon. So yes, the Combahee River Collective was the basis for the manifesto that changed rape culture and the movement that's still very alive. Now I am a speaker for Planned Parenthood nationally. I also organize large marches and I still advocate for abortion and sexual assault survivors in my community and nationally. I have Change Rape Culture is now a chapter in Pittsburgh where it is trans sex worker focused, and we directly aid sex workers during the pandemic. And we also advocate for trans, we redistribute our wealth and we create residencies for trans folk who are interested in launching careers in digital media or whatever they would like to do. So yeah, that's a little bit about the Combahee River Collective. And Afro-pessimism is something, Afrofuturism, I'm not a big fan of Afro-pessimism. It's a bit misogynist for me. But Afrofuturism is something that I also have rooted my work with Black Freedom Factory in. And so that's a whole other bear.
Can you tell us more about like how you came to how you came to found and direct Black Freedom Factory, especially moving from UTSA on?
Yeah, so I was actually pre-law at UTSA. I studied poli-sci. I went to the law school academy in the summer and I interned for judges and attorneys. And I was gonna do the thing, like I was gonna go to law school. And George Floyd happened. At the time I was studying for my LSAT. So I graduated in 2019. I had all my letters of rec submitted, all the things. And you know, Philando Castile happened, then Breonna Taylor happened, then George Floyd happened, and I could not focus on studying for my LSAT. It was also COVID, so I was taking the LSAT at home, which was very hard to study for. If you study for the LSAT, you know, traditionally you study in person, so it's very hard. But basically, George Floyd happened, and my rage blinded me. My grief blinded me. I could not focus on my LSAT studies or even law school. And I made the decision to march and to ask the city of San Antonio to rise up. And, you know, something that's really pivotal these days in activism is technology. I think that's something that a conversation that gets kind of lost. Like our ancestors had to organize via word of mouth, whereas these days you can do a call to action and it goes viral in a matter of seconds. And that's what happened with the George Floyd March in San Antonio. Thousands of people came out. And after that, I decided that San Antonio needed a more consistent conversation about anti-Blackness, because as an Afro-Latina, you know, I get washed out. My voice gets washed out a lot because of my Blackness, with this city being predominantly Latinx. I have found that I'm spoken over a lot, and like my views on my heritage are not prioritized, right? And that's really weird that there's a hierarchy when there's an entire diaspora of Latinidad. And so I was excited to start a conversation called Black Freedom Factory, an organization called Black Freedom Factory that challenged professionalism, had conversations about the boardroom, who goes into the boardroom, why we should have tattoos and piercings, and why my Afro shouldn't intimidate you, but it does, and I'm here for it. And so Black Freedom Factory really came to life in a way that I was ready for and was not ready for at the same time. It was an instant influx of media and responsibility. It was important for millennials to have this conversation. It was important for a queer Black woman to have this conversation about professionalism. And it's important for a queer Black woman to be in these spaces because the organization is about data-driven activism, and data is a very whitewashed, male-dominated conversation. So it's really powerful for not only myself to come into these spaces and say, the root of those numbers do not identify with the generational trauma that the neighborhood has experienced, but also to say that we need youth of color administering these surveys. We need youth active in these conversations about data analytics and how privileged of a conversation they actually are, and how sacred a survey is. Like, you know, I use this example in my youth development, Circles in the Hood, which is a program I've launched through my research. I work with kids on the West Side who live in the Castellanos, and I teach them about data. And but I also work with them on generational trauma and healing and identifying places of rage or abuse and channeling that into beauty. I'm so sorry, laptop, that was loud. And I often tell them, I'm like, you know, it's not cool for a data analyst to come up to you and ask, like at UTSA constantly, they like give you a slice of pizza to fill out a survey, right? And that's so shitty. Like a slice of pizza does not at all compensate for an exchange of somebody's individual experience in their hood or in their, you know, red line district, right? So I'm really trying to reshape the way that data is collected, qualitatively and quantitatively, and just reshape the way that looks for the future of youth, because a survey is so much more than a survey, and an experience is so much more than experience. And we need the people from their hoods reporting on what these numbers look like and mean to them.
Do you find like what folks are, like, I know, especially after George Floyd, did you find a lot of folks, businesses being interested in accessing this data?
For a couple months, you know, there was that performance. You saw, like, just like with Colgate, like putting rainbow shit on their advertisements during Pride Month. Like, it was kind of like that. It's like, oh, Black people, you know, we want to be aware ish. We want to be active in the conversation for the couple of months that follow because we don't want to be those people. Yeah, of course. You know, you had that influx of like awkward PR marketing conversations that I'd be like asked to consult on, and then they would like not want to pay the invoice, right? So the energy is something that like I am also instilling in the youth. Like, your labor is so fucking valid. Like, charge and add tax, because every hour is a perspective that has been cultivated by layers of oppression, intersections of that. And so, yeah, I did find, and I still do find conversations where, or organizations wanting me, seeking my training in anti-Blackness and anti-racism. But it's, you know, with an organization like Black Freedom Factory, you really have to follow the trend. And that's so unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that Black Lives Matter is a trend. It's unfortunate that these conversations are on a wave, you know, and when in fact, like, as a Black person, your life matters every day. It doesn't just matter when George Floyd gets, you know, murdered on national media. It matters when you go home at night and you have to deal with that on your TL being redistributed constantly by the media. So I do consult. So I consult major organizations. I'm now at the point, and you know, in the nonprofit world, the level in which Black Freedom Factory has grown is really big. It's in a sense kind of growing bigger than I was prepared for it to. But that doesn't mean I can't keep up with it. But yeah, I mean, when you're getting donations from because we're getting donations from like AARP and Diva Cup, right, for our homeless initiative, and you know, when you're dealing with these major corporations and you're having these conversations, the one thing that I like try to stay married to is uncomfortability. I do not ever want a training to be comfortable. I don't ever want it to be a PowerPoint click situation. Like when you leave my training, you're going to think about it in the car on the way home, in the shower that night, like, and at your dinner table. So that's like a priority of mine in my anti-Blackness training. But yes, I have gotten a number of folks who want to seek that.
Can you also tell us a little bit about, so recently I saw your activism around the events at the border in Del Rio. So organizing organizing with Black Freedom Factory, right, to get donations to the border for the influx of Haitian immigrants, migrants that came through, and the lack of response, right, by the state. Do you want to share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, that's oh my goodness. This is a quick take. Let me put my phone on do not disturb and hope that works. Okay, cool beans. So yes, that is the freshest development in Black Freedom Factory. So my partner is from Del Rio, Texas, and she is best buds with the mayor of Del Rio, Texas. And throughout our relationship, I visited and I've gotten to make that connection. So Del Rio is really near and dear to my heart. And I've also gotten to understand the politics there through the mayor. We're pretty much political confidants. Like we have that aspect of like where we just vent, like we call each other and vent on border issues and then like San Antonio issues. And a couple months ago, he gave me a call and he was like, Kimiya, there's gonna be a border crisis. Like there's gonna be a crisis, it's coming. Haitians are influxing to the border in a way that is dangerous for their lives because of the politics here, because Del Rio is predominantly a Republican town. It's a Trump town. And so he was like, I'm worried about their interactions with law enforcement, you know, because they're Black immigrants. And I understood this 100%. And so that was a very interesting point in my career where I was like talking to the mayor of this city that is like, you know, a Republican city. Their votes usually are. He's a liberal mayor though. He's gay too, the first gay mayor in Texas, by the way. Literally, we love to see it. But yeah, so he was like, I see this border crisis coming, and I was like, okay, cool. And so we just talked on the politics of it, because I don't know if you know, and I'm no secret about my distaste for Ron Nirenberg's certain decisions that Ron Nirenberg makes. He's very moderate on issues of immigration in San Antonio, and it literally drives me insane because we get influxes. San Antonio is one of the several passing points that immigrants are processed and function through. And so his stance on immigration is just like crazy to me, especially because he identifies as Asian. And so anyways, so then the border crisis happens, right? So he calls me. It was before it even had touched the media. And he was like freaking out. He was like, Kimiya, there are 5,000 Haitian migrants right now under this bridge, and there are 10,000 like on their way and said to arrive by tomorrow. I need your help because Del Rio doesn't get a lot of media. These border towns don't get media. The only media that covers this is Fox 7 because they want to exploit the narrative of immigration, right? All they care about is like the border wall. And so he was like, I'm not talking to Fox, can you help me? So I posted on my Instagram and I said, let's see who bites, right? And it took fire like that. And he gave an urgent call to the administration, and thankfully reporters jumped on it. It's another point I want to make. The relationship between journalists and activists is so symbiotic. It's like crazy. Like the relationship building is very imperative because they report on issues that matter right then and there. And so a lot of the journalists and relationships I've made nationwide and statewide jumped on that story, and they were able to get the Department of Homeland Security out there and help them process these Haitian migrants. This was my first real work. This was my first like real activism experience with immigration. And I am at a loss of words. One of the main things that I've realized is that immigration is a crisis as it exists in the status quo of the United States, not just when Haitians are under a bridge waiting to be processed and hungry and giving birth, right? But when, you know, we have, I mean, the state that Trump left immigration in, the state that Obama Obama also created for immigrants, and even post 9/11, the xenophobia, the terrorist language that has been associated with immigration is a crisis as it exists legally and socially in the status quo of America. I, as a Black queer woman, have always appreciated the contribution that immigrants have brought to the United States of America. It astounds me that the United States likes to claim that it's a melting pot or boiling pot or whatever the fuck, and not have that energy when we're welcoming people who have the right to seek asylum in a country like the United States. So, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox that direction. And I said, what can I do to help? So I put out just a simple, just like the George Floyd protest, I put one post. My idea, I thought I was just going to drive a church van. I work partially with Travis Park Church. I was going to drive a church van down to Del Rio with whatever I could get from businesses in SA. I created a literal Amazon wish list, and it went viral like that. And thousands, I'm talking hundreds of thousands of donations were being sent overnight. I wish I could show you all a picture of my friends. One of our drop-off locations, we had boxes up to the ceiling because people all over the nation who weren't near the border or in Texas wanted to know how they could help. And so Black Freedom Factory was one of a couple organizations in Texas that really put our boots on the ground and figured out how we can bridge that gap between the nation who care and Texas. And so I've been coordinating a mass donation distribution statewide for the past 2 weeks. And that's been interesting. Also, Beyonce's nonprofit, Recognize Black Freedom Factory. I just want to put that out there. Beyonce, y'all, Beyonce. So that was a big deal for me. Beehive, Be Good, her nonprofit organization, shouted out BFF. So it's just moments like that where the work is like, and Beyonce does really good work. So I was like, damn, as a queer, I'm like, what? She might know I exist, this could be a thing. So it's been really fun to just immerse myself in different issues because they're all the same issue. Like access to abortion, is access to healthcare. Access to healthcare is like access to that for an immigrant, right? So it's all just this domino effect. And I feel like the sooner we can make society realize that, the better off we will be politically as a nation. But until then, there is so much work to do. And I'm not sure I'll see it by the end of my lifetime.
No, you're speaking to themes that we're talking about this whole semester in terms of intersectionality. How do you approach activism through an actual intersectional lens? And you just said it there perfectly, how all of these things intersect, right? And they're all connected and related to each other. And we also talk about sort of abolition and recognizing that it's not gonna be within our lifetime or even next lifetime, right? It's something that exists. So I love, and I don't know, we haven't actually talked about Afrofuturism. So that's not really my lane. I was wondering if you want to share some of that and how it guides your work and offer some introduction to that to the class, because that would be a new concept here in this class space.
Yes, I can definitely. I'm an Afrofuturist nerd. It's gonna be a miracle if I don't rant for a couple hours. So I'll start with what you said about abolition, right? This is one of the best ways I can break it down. So abolition and reform, these are two really weirdly placed philosophies and values and practices that I find just dancing around each other in the status quo of the United States. AOC is reform, right? And then you have Ilhan Omar, that's sis, burn it down. But then when you look at these two activists or advocates, because I have some reservations about AOC, but I won't go there because I don't want any cancel culture happening against me. But when you look at these two Black women, and I wrote my senior thesis on this actually when I graduated, Ilhan Omar being a darker skinned immigrant, right? Versus, and I hate to verse because it's not cool to pit women against each other, but it's the status quo we live in. Then there's AOC, who is this lighter skinned, straighter haired woman, who has a different story they both are fierce advocates, though nonetheless, I don't want to take anything away from their work. But you really see the way AOC is pushed to the front of magazine covers, of news articles. The terrorist threats against against Ilhan Omar are much more vivid. They're much more aggressive. And the interesting aspect of that situation is just, as a Black woman, I'm always looking at who passes the mic to Black women, right? I'm always looking at like I hate the paper bag, so the paper bag test, but it's like when you are a darker skinned Black woman, you're usually, not the first in line to speak. You're really at the back of the classroom. So I like to put reform and abolition in those contexts, right? So when we talk about abolition, I don't like to say we have to be careful, because yes, absolutely. Like, I'm all for the bottom up approach. Like, if it's not working, we need to start from the root, right? But we have to be critical about who burns first. If we're talking about burning something down, who burns first? Is it our marginalized poor communities that burn first? And then when we talk about the ivory tower, how tall is that tower? And what do we got to do to climb it? We throw rocks, right? In the status quo of the United States, we throw rocks with our advocacy. We throw rocks with our protests. We throw rocks with our statements. But getting there is a very hard process, and people of color who find themselves in the ivory tower usually lose sense of value and character and culture. And so it's like, Get Out. I've loved Jordan Peele's depiction of this in Get Out, because it's really true, and even in relationships, when we're interracially dating, my partner is a Mexican woman. I have to constantly be like, let's check your privilege here. Let's reel this in. I'm not like, if I'm here to be your partner, one thing, there's labor of love, and then there's labor of labor, right? And I can teach you, but I'm not going to exhaust my peace or my resources for you to do that work, especially when there are books and Google and all of the things at your disposal, So when we talk about abolition, we really have to be critical and careful about who burns first. We have to prepare our communities for these kinds of conversations. We have to make sure that they're accessible to our communities. So privilege checks are something that we constantly should be doing as grassroots movements and organizations. The world of debate and CX policy taught me like conversations about ableism, conversations about the intersections of my privilege. Sure, I'm a Black queer woman, but I'm not a Black trans woman. And I understand the privilege that I have in that, right? So these are very important things to acknowledge and realize. So in Afrofuturism, I'll cut to the chase. Basically, I started off arguing something called Afro-pessimism, which is a philosophy very coined by someone named Frank Wilderson. So basically this argument says like, Black folk, or recognizes that I don't like the word recognizes because I don't believe it, but that Black folk are like the bottom of the totem pole. We've been subjected to grotesque behaviors throughout the history of the United States. There are often examples of like touching Black women's hair and how violent that is. And it like parallels that to the slave days when Black women were put in museums and Black people were put in museums, to be seen. And Give Turtle Back its islands. He talks about colonization and how, the transatlantic slave trade, it really paints slavery out to be what it really was. And when I was debating this philosophy, I was debating it against a lot of straight white men, because that's also the world of debate. I would often debate the Navy and the Army as well. They actively debate us in CX policy. And I found myself so rage, like it was an unhealthy rage I was experiencing when I would get out of the debate room, right? And I would be in the store, or it was a really taxing world to live in. And I found Afrofuturism. And so Afrofuturism is pretty much the other lens of Afro existence. And it basically says that Blackness is not just fucking amazing, but it exists in the future. And our existence as it is right now is already a resistance, because the slave trade did not think that Black folk would be able to read or write or create And so Afrofuturism is a very beautiful philosophy because it allows Blackness to flourish and thrive. And it does acknowledge the pain and the struggle and the sacrifice, but it doesn't dwell on it. And that's what I really like about Afrofuturism, because as a Black person, you really got to look to the future. Has anybody ever said, you know, if I can get through this week, you know, if I can get through this week, I can get to the next one. And I feel like that's what Afrofuturism does for me. It understands the present in order to deal, it understands the past in order to deal with the present, to make pathways for the future. And so my case in debate, the topic was space. And me and my partner created an Afro-Indigenous affirmative case. And we basically said, we're gonna plant corn in space. We're gonna plant maize in space. And we talked, because corn is also a resistance. And we used the literal symbolism of corn and its existence now as a GMO-ridden vegetable that's been turned yellow. And we like decolonized that. And we were like, nah, like, we're gonna like plant our corn in space. It's gonna be colorful, and our futures are gonna exist there, free of rape, free of industrialization and all the things that we've experienced on this earth. And so, Black quantum physics is something else that exists in Afrofuturism, which basically just challenges Western linear notions of time, which is what I've done with Black Freedom Factory. I often, some of my workshops go into professional spaces and acknowledge that time in what the Western linear context is violent. Time to communities of color does nothing but incarcerate, punish, and trigger anxiety and PTSD and many things that we as people of color already deal with. So Afrofuturism is so powerful because it really challenges everything we know and think and feel about society, civil society as it exists now. And so I'm so grateful for it. I highly recommend reading it's a book called Afrofuturism, Sci-Fi, Fiction and Fantasy. It's by Yatasha Wamak. And that's literally like a 1, 2, 3 Afrofuturism book that can really immerse you in that world. But yeah, it's freaking dope.
Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna pause my questions and open it up to any of the students. If you want to ask any questions or have any comments or reflections, please feel free to share.
Not all at one time.
I'll say something. Hi, my name's Liz. Thank you for coming and talking to our class today. I just want to say you are so awesome. I've been watching you since the George Floyd March. I've seen you in the news up Capitol Hill for voting rights. Like, I've been following you since then, and your work is amazing. So when I first going back to the George Floyd March. I remember at that time, I mean, everybody's emotions and intentions were high and things like that. And I remember being at home watching the news I watched the news 24/7, you know, when I was home and not, you know, marching day and night. And I remember seeing, it was like early in the morning, like watching every news station, every different city. And I remember watching the news here, and it was like probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. And Sheriff Salazar, he gets on and he says, you know, you've all come down, you've marched, you've said your piece, now go home, right? So like, I get the point, right? They don't want people tearing up the city and then doing all kind of stuff out there. But it enraged me so much, the way he said it in his demeanor, as if this was something that was just, oh, you know, like we were coming downtown for any march, right? Any other march. And just that attitude that, you know, like as if it was nothing. I mean, it made me so upset. Like, I ended up writing this huge long email to the sheriff's office. Of course, there's no reply. Anyway, fast forwarding to my question, what was your experience you know, during the march with the police department and the sheriff's department and those attitudes.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I feel like I'm going back in time. It was really terrifying. What the news was not telling people was that we were being followed by unmarked cars when we would leave protests. We were being surveilled outside of our houses. It was eerily parallel to the Black Panther Party and what they endured when they were advocating. We were pepper sprayed for no reason. Literally, there were times where they would pull up in unmarked cars and get out of their cars and pepper spray us. And I don't know if you've ever been pepper sprayed, but that is not a pleasant experience. I had a friend that was detained, or that was arrested, and she was beat very severely while she was in custody. And she was wearing a shirt that said Marquise Jones, Charles Roundtree, and Anthony Scott, say their names. And those are victims of police violence in San Antonio, for people who do not know. And they literally laughed at her shirt and they said, "We killed them. We killed them. What are you going to do?" And it took her months to recover from that experience. And they let her go. They couldn't keep her anymore. We were able to bail her out via community donations. But that's the sentiment in which, for the cameras, they're very, actually, I just won't give them credit. They're shitty all the way around. Let's just say that they're more gate-kept when the cameras are up, but my experience with them is absolutely traumatizing and triggering. To this day, if they walk into wherever I'm at, I have to leave or like go to the bathroom or figure out what to do, just because, I mean, the police state as it exists is violent. It always has been. And so even the way that the conversation about reallocating funding from the police department was this dangerous, threatening act to a very well-funded police department, by the way, is indicative, and it's proof that this movement is bigger than the violent system that functions. So it was a very terrible experience. And also, as an activist, you know, you're being reported on what goes on inside of the jail, and Sheriff Salazar does not ever talk about the number of suicides that occur in the Bexar County prison. Inmates were screaming at us from where they were being held, screaming out their parents' phone numbers because they were being denied phone calls and showers and food during COVID-19. So yeah, it's just like when you actually resist, you know, people with guns, and it's a very traumatizing experience. So thank you for making space for that.
I got a question for you. Hold on, let me see.
Mm-hmm.
See if you can see. Bad. Can you see me? Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't find my shirt. My bad. Came late. But I'm not. Anyway, let's get into it. So how does it feel? Because like I never really like ask specific questions to people that are like really into like the movement and whatnot. So how do you feel about like being like targeted? Because like once you make that decision to like do what's right and do what you believe in, and how does that affect you like mentally, like feeling like regardless of where you go, you're in the press. I do remember seeing your face in the news. Like people know who you are. So like how does that, like when you walk down the street, stuff like that, like how does that make you feel, like knowing like you're doing what's right, but other people think otherwise? Like do you feel threatened, or you know what I mean? Like what I'm trying to say, like, because I mean my grandma always said like, you know, never like lay down, always stand, you know, 10 toes down and do what you know is right. And good trouble, you know, like with the whole movement, you know, Martin Luther and all them. So like in general, like your overall feel. I'm kind of jumbled because I have a lot of questions I want to ask, but generally, like, how do you feel about, like, okay, would you take back what you've done so far for San Antonio and your whole movement?
That's a really wonderful question. And I don't actually get asked that a lot, so I appreciate it. So hell no, I would do it all over again. I would do it all over again. And that's something that you have to be when you take on a system that's supposed to be bigger than you, but you're bigger than it. In reality, we are bigger than this system, and it knows that. And it has these checks and balances in place to gatekeep our power. You have to be unapologetic in every sense of the word. There hasn't been one moment where I have regretted advocating for survivors of rape or advocating for, anything, because the truth of the matter is, it would be an honor to die for the things that I fight for. Some people die. Some people die with just traumatically. Some people die, for different reasons. But for me, it would be an honor to die for the things that I fight for. And so, yeah, but it is, as a human being, it is hard and it is surreal sometimes. I'm like 5'5" in real life. I'm like 5'5", I'm 130 pounds. And so I'm like going up to like white men way bigger than me and like grown men. And I'm like, what's up, son? And that's like, it's like moments when my adrenaline is down, I'm like, whoa, Kimiya, that could have ended a different way. But I don't know. I really feel like I just channeled the rage of my ancestors. I feel invincible when I am out there, when I in any day, when I'm tackling these issues. It's something that I would highly recommend. But yes, going on national media is hard. Like when I was on CNN for the first time, my bank account was hacked. And I had to like get a new debit card and stuff like that, because, when you're going on these national platforms, you're being watched by the internationally. CNN is an international platform. Wow. So it is terrifying, and I do have moments where I'm like, my partner, I have to prepare her for certain things that could happen. And I I have to call my attorney and be like, before I get arrested, I got arrested in July in Washington, D.C. And I had to prepare a will. So it's just like things like that make it real, but it's totally worth it.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I see Milagros' hand is up, and then I have some questions in the chat that I'll ask after. Milagros?
Hi, so thank you for speaking to us about everything. I just wanted to know how obviously the pandemic has impacted stuff in a way, because people were able to pay attention to stuff more and become more aware. And I think social media just was also a big form of educating a lot of more people throughout those 2 years, because people had more time to be on their phone and stuff. How have you seen a change in the movements, and how because of the way that the pandemic happened and because people have gotten more aware of things that are going on, how has that changed the movements in any way?
Yeah, technology once again. And I wonder how far along we would be in the movement if Angela Davis and Fred Hampton had access to TikTok and Instagram, right? And Twitter, and the youth, oh my God, working with the youth. I'm so sorry. It's not a ding. My phone doesn't ding. The youth are so powerful. They're so aware, right? For example, just really quick, I want to brag on one of my youth last week. Their partners trans, and they came up to me and they were like, "Miss, I set boundaries with my boyfriend today." And I'm like, what? If I knew how to set boundaries in my relationships at their age, what's... So I definitely think technology is going to be a very pivotal aspect to the movement. COVID-19 has really restructured the way organizing works. That's something else that I've noticed, the way that organizers have had to learn how to organize, especially voting rights, how we've had to learn to mobilize voters via technology, but also how we've been able to include people with disabilities in voting, right? Now mail-in ballots, the Republicans were terrified that mail-in ballots were an option because that included an entire population of single mothers, of people with disabilities who can't walk to the polls, right? And they were threatened by this huge horizon of possibility of voters. So I do see a pivotal change in the movement, and it's just like, I'm just so honored because our ancestors were a bit further off from the beauty that we've been able to see blossom in the movement thus far. So that's what I've noticed is technology, and COVID has actually, if anything, worked. And I don't mean this with any disrespect to the people that have died due to COVID, but it's worked in the favor of abolitionists because we've had to learn how to restructure and regroup at the snap of a finger.
There was a related question in the chat from Ray. Though there was gratitude from Lillian, who was very thankful and grateful for you to come to the class. And Ray asked, what strategies do you recommend for helping the conversation, I guess, last? So the example he gave was queer rights beyond the month of June, right? And keeping sort of the momentum up for these issues that keep happening.
Yeah, so a couple of things I recommend is the youth, right? So the youth is something that I really poured a lot of my like future programming into, just because they quite literally are going to be carrying the baton of the movement and the change. And there's so much like beautiful like blossoming and development there. The implications, and say their name. Hashtag say their name is like praxis. I don't know if y'all are too familiar with praxis, but praxis is what makes a movement move. Like it literally, like whenever we put those flyers in the bathroom for Change Rape Culture, that was literally the praxis that the movement needed to move, aside from the actual movement aspect of our boots on the ground. So saying their names, like that's the biggest thing that happens with these cases in Black Lives Matter, is that, you know, these names are not repeated or they're not said, but it is because George Floyd unfortunately became a hashtag, Breonna Taylor became a hashtag. There's another Black woman that was murdered by a maintenance person, Mia, right? That's trending on Twitter right now. These names have to be kept up in the media, and not just in the media, at our dinner tables. We have to disrupt our dinner tables. And thirdly, the thing that I'd say is your family. Generational trauma is fucking real. And when you disrupt that space, you are literally disrupting generations of trauma from your grandparents and their grandparents. And by being that Black sheep, you are changing the direction in which your family goes in. And if they're not willing to go in that direction, make your own. As a queer person, chosen family has saved my life. It was when certain parental figures in my family did not approve of my sexuality or identity, that I had to choose other people to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas with. And I'll do it any day than be oppressed at a table in the name of a colonized holiday like Thanksgiving.
Thank you for that. There was a question related to that. I'm going to jump to that. And then we had two questions related to sort of like healing and taking care of yourself. So there was a question about, opposition from close relations, whether that's out of like not agreeing or not understanding, or even out of like fear and concern. How do you deal with that within close relationships?
So I have like a meter of like labor, right? That I have for myself as a boundary, right? There's certain levels that it touches that I'm like, this is not good for my spirit or my mind, and I'm not even going to go there with you when there are resources for you to tap into. So firstly is identifying your boundaries. What makes you tick, but what pushes you over the edge in a place that you can't come back from? You never want to go there, right? When it comes to a close relationship, I have had to sever several close relationships in the name of the revolution, because to me, I just got to practice what I preach, period. I can't have people in my life that are not willing to grow and change in their way, right? And we don't necessarily have to see eye to eye. And there is a world where we can agree to disagree. But when it comes down to blatant basic principles of human rights, like if you're going to misgender another trans person, you don't belong in my life. If you're going to, make rape jokes around me, you don't deserve to be in my life. Those are boundaries that I've set for myself. So firstly, you got to identify your own boundaries. And then you also have to analyze that relationship with that person. I have not spoken to my mother in 2 years, because she has some anti-Blackness and some homophobia that she needs to work through. And I had to recognize that I am not a licensed therapist and I don't owe her that. That is generational trauma that we're going to need a therapist to work through. And I don't have to take that on. And I think in machismo culture too, this also applies. It's not our responsibility to slay all these demons in our families and in our close personal relationships. There is a personal responsibility that needs to happen there in all of these conversations and cases.
And so maybe that's related to the questions about sort of taking care of yourself. Joanna asked, what are some ways that you've learned to deal with emotional trauma that comes with doing this work? And Jimena asked about healing from trauma, like generationally and recent.
The only way to heal is to hurt. You really have to make space for your pain. You really have to bask in it. You have to own it. You have to understand that it's going to make you stronger. It already has, no matter how bad it hurts in that moment. And oftentimes in conversations with survivors of rape and sexual assault, I don't promise them that with time it will heal, because that's a false conception of anybody's narrative, simply because that's a dystopia, right? Surviving is surviving until the day you die. It's not a one and done process. As a survivor, you are triggered maybe 5 years later or 5 weeks later. It all depends on your process. And also healing is not linear. When we accept those things, we accept that time and healing is not linear, and that surviving is enough. Like I often say, if you brushed your teeth and put on deodorant, you did it. You got out of bed to get right back in, you did it, right? Like these little things are celebrations, because being a human is literally hard. Like it's so hard to be a human. So just really making space for your pain and your trauma is the best way. I have had some horrible conversations with myself. I try to have hard conversations with myself. But it is because in order to heal, I have to heal too. And working with the youth also helps me. Like I can't go into a neighborhood and try to heal the generational trauma that's happened there without engaging myself. And every week we do blessing and baggage in our circles. And I always have to do a check-in, like what's blessing, what's baggage for me. And then thirdly, I'll say how I deal with my trauma and how I heal is I find things that bring me joy. So I have plants. I love my plants. I'm a proud plant mom gang over here. I also got a dog. I love my puppy. I love taking care of him. His name's Souffle. And I also, my partner, right? Like I don't necessarily make that like my method of surviving because that's unhealthy, but I definitely I let her in. I'm vulnerable with her. And those things, we have to really make time to be human. But I'm not sure I can fully answer this question because I'm still learning, I'm still adapting. I'm like 1 year into the most heavy activism I've ever done. And so I'm still navigating this process as well. And if you're gay, be gay. That's what I was gonna say. Just be as gay as you can be. Yes.
I love that. And then our last question, because I'm looking at the time and I want to be respectful. Joseph says, are you optimistic for the future, given how socially aware the upcoming newer generation of people are, especially in terms of social issues for people of color and LGBTQ+?
I am so optimistic. And you know why? Because there are so many people that said, this is too hard, wah, like checking out. Because there are so many people that choose that route and you have the full autonomy too. It is hard. This is a hard fight to fight. If I did not see a horizon, I would not wake up every day and give my life to this. So absolutely, there is hope. And it's breaking through, it's busting through the seams every day. So I believe in everything that humanity and the word encapsulates. about the future.
So beautiful, so powerful. Any final comments or anything before we let go? Thank you so much. We got some thanks in the chat. But yes, thank you so much for giving us your time. Oh, sorry, Victoria, I see your hand.
Yeah. I think it was freshman or sophomore year. I remember when the March for Change Rape Culture was happening, and I remember just like seeing like it happening, and people were like so confused, and I was there like mesmerized, and I was just like, whoa, like you can do that, like you can like actually use your voice, and it like kind of started this like, I guess, like empowerment in me that I didn't even know that I like really wanted to touch into. So I just want to say thank you for that. And we follow each other on Instagram, and like I always see everything and I'm like, wow, why is she so powerful? And I just like remember being so young and like not knowing anything and just wanting to educate myself. And like you were one of those like first people or first like resource I was able to find to be able to like connect me with that. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I remember you. I do follow you. You and your boo are so cute. And yeah, thank you so much.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you so much. I will email you and follow up soon to make sure that we process all your paperwork. But I'm so, so grateful for not only coming to this class, but for what you do for San Antonio and for what you mean to so many different communities and how you do offer us like a template and hope. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope to come back again.
Yes, anytime. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, y'all. Any questions, comments, reflections, either on the presentation or also on the readings, which I feel like went really well, indirectly and also